Happy to be here tonight. I'm with the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission and also an environmental planner, and love working in Chester and hiking out there as well. Should I tag someone in?
Let me go down my list because otherwise it's
Okay.
going to get crazy, I think. So how about Dave Pierce? Dave, can you hear us? All right, I'm going to keep going down my list. Corinne, could you type into the chat box for Dave, and maybe he needs to hit his volume.
Richard Holzman here.
Great, thanks. Richard, can you just introduce yourself?
Richard Holzman, selectman in Chester.
Thanks for being here, Richard.
My pleasure.
I've got Anne from Anne's iPad.
I'm here.
Great, could you introduce yourself, please?
Ann Daly, Chester resident.
Very good, thank you, Anne. How about Andy Myers?
Hello, I'm Andy Myers.
I still can't hear anybody else. I still can't hear you.
We can hear you, Dave.
It keeps saying the host muted me. It keeps going off. It says the host muted me. What else down here? What's down here?
I can always hear Dave.
I don't know.
All right, sorry about that. We'll work with Dave to try to get this figured out. But Andy, you were just saying.
Yes, I've lived in Chester for 27 years. I've been on a variety of committees, have enjoyed hiking with several of you. I'm currently the chair of the Finance Committee.
Great.
I
Thank
got
you very
that, yeah.
How about Bob Daly?
What do you mean?
Hello, everybody. Bob Daly, a proud member of Team Chester. And I just have a quick question regarding the fabulous dinner provided by the Chester Common Table.
I have no.
Should we presume that this is the new Zoom in a dinner that's going to replace dinner in a movie?
Well, it seems to have replaced dinner in a movie in my life in the past year. So it's always a perk when dinner comes along with it.
Great perk, thank you.
Yeah. Meredith, why don't we jump to you for that? Because I think Meredith is to thank for that great idea of the lasagna.
Wow, sure. Well, it's just been a pleasure to try and let people know in Chester what it means to look for nature-based solutions and think about vulnerability and strengths. And I've loved every minute of it. It's been a challenge during COVID, but so is everything. And I'm just glad that so many people joined us.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can. Can you hear us?
All right, yeah, I got myself straightened out here.
All right, thanks,
As
Dave.
for the
Why don't you
meal,
go ahead?
I just hope I don't pass out and nod out here after that lasagna. That's the only thing.
Could you give us a brief introduction?
Sure, Dave Pierce, Wild and Scenic Rep for Chester, Chester Foundation, the Railroad Station, and Friends of the Keystone Arches, maintenance at the Town Hall.
All right, thank you very much for being here.
All righty, you're welcome. Glad I finally figured my way in.
And I'm gonna jump in for a second, Dave, because I don't think you were able to hear us before when Emily was
I wasn't
introducing. We're just asking everyone to mute themselves while they're not speaking, so that way we cut down on background noise. So I have muted you in the past, which I saw in your note.
I kept trying to figure out my sound, and I kept seeing, well, the host muted me. Well, I must be doing something wrong.
Okay.
All right, I'll do that from now on.
Great.
All right, moving down the line here, Chris Martinson.
Hi, everyone. Chris Martinson, your Chester resident. I live at the bottom of Johnson Hill doing two things. First, on our property here, Evie and I are, you might have seen some cows out in the field now, and we're very interested in increasing the abundance of this land we live on. And I'm also the sponsor for a group of investors that are revitalizing the old Brookside lodge across the street, also at bottom of Johnson Hill.
Great. Thanks for being here, Chris. Peggy Gravelin.
I'm Peggy Graveline. I'm the Director of the Council on Aging.
Great. Thanks, Peggy. Let's see. How about Leanda? Am I saying that right?
Yep, you got it. So I'm Leanda Fontaine. I'm the aquatic biologist for Mass Wildlife's Western District Office out of Dalton, and I'm also one of the state reps on the Westfield Wild and Scenic Committee.
Great. Thank you. Carrie Ann.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carrie Ann Petrick, and I am the regional coordinator for the Berkshires and Hilltowns in the MVP program. So if there's any questions that you have, whether it's during the planning grant process or about action grants, I am here to help you as much as I can.
Great, thank you. Okay, we've got Erin Patrick.
Hi, everybody. I'm Erin. I live in Middlefield, just up the hill from Chester, but my husband and I own and operate Carm's Restaurant and Chester Common Table. So I'm glad that everyone is enjoying the lasagna tonight. Thanks, guys.
Yes, here, here. Thank you.
Thank you.
How about Laura Wade?
Yes, hi. My name's Laura Wade, and I'm also a Chester resident.
Okay. So that was the list that I had in front of me. Has anyone else joined? If anyone has not introduced themselves, so I've got someone from Highway and then someone calling in from a number that ends in 9016. If either of you could speak up and let us know who you are, that would be great.
I'm Kathy Warden, Town Administrator for Chester. I'm 9016. I cannot get on through a normal Zoom. I've tried the passcode every different way and it won't work. So I will be listening.
All right, thanks, Kathy. Let us know if if you want to shoot either Corinne or Patty an email, we might be able to help out.
And I am Carl Baldessaro with the Highway.
Okay.
At the top of the list.
Thank you, Carl.
You're very welcome.
Liz Massa is on as well. I don't know.
Great. Liz?
Hi, guys. Yes, Liz Masso, Western Mass Hilltown Hikers, and also Town of Chester Parks and Trails and Board of Health.
Very good. All right, did I miss anyone else? Great. So let's jump right in. Again, I'm Emily Slotnick. I want to thank you all for being here, first and foremost, on behalf of myself, on behalf of the town and the town's MVP team, taking the time to be here tonight and hopefully for the next 2 workshops in this series is, it's a big commitment, but it's a really important step in improving the town's resilience and adaptation and reducing the vulnerabilities to climate change. So that's what we're here for tonight. I'm going to go through a brief presentation and then we'll start workshopping. So let's see here. Okay, so this is who we are. You can, hopefully most of you have seen these faces, but again, I'm Emily Slotnick. I've got Patty Gambarini and Corinne Meisimons, also from PVPC. We're tag teaming on these workshops, so you might see a lot of me tonight, but you'll probably see a lot more of Corinne and Patty in the next 2. And then Meredith Babcock, who many of you have probably seen face-to-face in person in Chester in recent weeks. And she has been an all-star for us on the community engagement side of this. Notes on using Zoom. A lot of us have grown really familiar with this platform in the last few weeks, months, year now. For those of you who are still new to it, a couple of tips. If you get kicked off, we'll keep going and you can just click on the same link that got you in here in the first place. You will come back in and join us. After the presentation, we are, as I said, going to talk about Chester's features and how they're vulnerable to climate impacts. how we're going to reduce those vulnerabilities. And for that discussion, we're going to ask people to, when you want to speak up, you can use the hand raise tool if you'd like to share. But just like we're doing now, if you're not speaking, we do ask that you stay on mute. The chat box is also a really great tool for if you have questions during the presentation or even during the discussion. If you'd prefer to type your questions in the chat box or type your input into the chat box, we can take that and translate it into our notes as well. And so in your control panel at the bottom of your window, you can click chat, and that window should open up on the right side of your screen. Let's see, anything else? We will be dropping links in the chat box. We've already dropped some. We'll probably repeat those in the chat box. So you might want to click on them. Keep an eye out there for anything coming from Corinne or Patty or Meredith while I'm talking. And yeah, like I said, keep your mic muted. That sort of helps everyone else hear the presentation. If you're having a spotty connection, try turning off your camera. Sometimes that helps folks at least hear the audio. And you're welcome to reach out to us in the chat box if you're having technical issues, and we'll do our best to help. But obviously we've got somewhat limited capacity just in that we are planners and not IT tech people. But we do have quite a bit of experience on Zoom, so we may be able to troubleshoot. And just to repeat, we're recording this webinar and we will share it along with all the other project deliverables in the coming weeks, likely in that same folder that I've shared with you guys already in the Google Drive folder that you've seen a link to that in the email, and you've also seen a link to that now in the chat box.
Emily, can you go over how to use the raise hand feature?
I would ask that I do that after the presentation because my screen right now doesn't have it. If it's easy for you to see, I would love for you to do that.
Okay, sorry, my dogs. So if you are using Zoom with a screen and you move your mouse down towards the lower panel, can you all hear me okay over my dogs? Then there should be a hand. It looks like a little hand icon. And when you click it, you effectively raise your hand, and then we as the hosts can see that, and we know that you have a question or something that you'd like to say. So it's like a way of doing it without just starting to talk, while somebody else is talking.
Great, thanks, Corinne. So this is what tonight is going to look like. We are going to get into the overview of MVP, why we're here, and then we're going to talk a little bit about climate hazards and the data that we are working with to.
I'm sorry, I unmuted myself. It's terrible. I don't see the hand at the bottom of the screen. It should be along the bottom.
Yes, yeah, if you go down to the bottom, you should, with your mouse, so your mouse has to go down to the bottom part, then you should see a smiley face that says reactions. And if then you see the hand. Sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm going off, signing off.
All right, thanks. So, right, we're going to be looking at these things in a presentation, and then we're hopefully going to spend the better part of the 7 o'clock hour having a discussion about climate adaptation strategies that can better support the features in the town of Chester. We'll do a poll starting at about 10 of 8 o'clock, maybe 50, I should say quarter of 8 o'clock. We'll start a poll to help us prioritize the actions that we've come up with. And then we will sort of roll into what to expect with the next workshop a week from today. So why are we all here? 2 reasons, first of which is climate change. So this slide is just telling us some things that a lot of us already know. In 2013, our atmospheric carbon dioxide levels exceeded 400 parts per million, which was higher than any time in human history. Across the world, each of the last 3 decades has been increasingly warmer than the previous. 20 of our hottest years on record have occurred in the last 22 years, and the last 5 were the hottest ever. And then a few summers ago in July of 2016, the month of July went down in the books as the hottest month ever recorded, according to NASA. It was a big deal. And then in August of 2016, the very next month, we tied that record. And then a year later, in July of 2017, we tied with August and July of 2016 as the hottest month on record. So we keep going up and up and up. It's not just what we are anticipating, it's what we're already seeing. And bringing that closer to home, you know, last summer's drought stretched across many areas of the Northeast, and severe conditions even spread to New Hampshire and Maine, which are usually exempt from the elevated levels of you know, dryness that were recorded. And here in Massachusetts, we are seeing these changes and their impacts almost every day. So the newest statewide climate projections tell us with more certainty than ever that we're going to see changes in precipitation, rising temperatures, and more extreme weather in coming years because of climate change. With precipitation, we're looking at nearly 20% of an increase in consecutive dry days, nearly 60% increase in days with more than 1 inch of rainfall. And these are days where, you know, those are rainfall events where you get flooding. 7.3 inches of additional annual rainfall. And that matters, especially if it all comes in a few big, heavy, short bursts. In terms of temperatures, just over 10 degrees Fahrenheit increase in average annual, 42% decrease in days per year with minimum temperatures below 32 degrees. So fewer of those really cold days, fewer deep freezes. And this is the really astonishing number here, 1,200% increase in 90-degree days per year. That's also astonishing. We're going to break that down in a little bit. In extreme weather, we're just going to see an increase in the frequency and magnitude of extreme weather events. These are heavy wind events, these are heavy rain events, hurricanes, so on. So again, why are we here? The workshop is part of a grant that Chester was awarded earlier in the year under the state's Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness program. Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness is the program we're referring to when we say MVP, and from here on out, I'm just going to say MVP because it's a mouthful. But it's a program that provides funding for cities and towns across the Commonwealth to plan for climate change impacts and to really build more resilient communities through projects that come out of this planning. So I said we're here for 2 reasons. The first being climate change, the second is MVP. One of the state's responses to the threat of climate change. This slide is just showing us some of the core principles of the MVP program. So they focus on harnessing local knowledge to provide the government, the state government, with a window into the challenges that we're facing, that our communities are facing on the ground. And the aim is to coordinate statewide efforts and then also align the state programs in a way that's going to really address those challenges. So MVP also, just based on the way the process works, you know, we're doing this planning with a lot of outreach and it's really bottom up. It generates local buy-in to these solutions. And that local buy-in is going to leverage existing resources and partnerships, but then also make you eligible for certain state grants that can support those existing resources and partnerships. So this workshop here is the crux of Chester's MVP planning grant. And our assignment today is to reflect on these local climate projections that I've just mentioned, and I'm going to get into in some more detail, and assess the town's vulnerability to those impacts. And then from that, today, we're going to be developing action-oriented resiliency strategies specifically for infrastructure. And the next 2 workshops will then cover the environmental features of Chester and the social or community resilience features of Chester. So at this point, Chester is among the majority of municipalities in the Commonwealth that have invested the time and the resources into doing this planning for climate change, as you can see from this slide. These colors are can be confusing, but essentially the light purple have completed the process that we're going through right now. They've become MVP certified communities. The dark purple are in the process right now, and the beige colored ones are going to be in the process. And then the dots on here are representing communities that have gone through the follow-on process of applying for and receiving an MVP action grant. And I will talk more about that later. Once the town completes the planning process, which is a one-year grant period from June 2020 to June 2021 in our case, it will receive designation as an MVP certified community. And then you get to compete for other state grant programs and funding opportunities. I should say, then you have an opportunity to compete for the MVP action grant. You also, as an MVP certified community, get priority in other state grants, meaning you might get a point on your grant application for another state grant because you are an MVP community. But the most specifically linked grant is the MVP action grant. It's available to only the MVP certified communities, and the RFR, actually, the latest one was just announced today. I think it was in my inbox either today or yesterday, up to $2 million for a single municipal project, requiring a 25% match. And if you did a regional project with other communities, with neighboring communities, or across your county or across your watershed, that top funding cap goes up to $5 million. So the actions that can get funded through this program, as well as today's discussion, when we get into our workshop portion, they have to have a direct link to climate change. And I'll try to sort of bring that point up as we go, because while there are a lot of things that we want to do for our communities in this program setting, we want to make sure that we're really tying it back to the impacts of climate change and the data that is available to us now, to tell us what we can expect. So these are some of the project types that are eligible under that action grant. The next few slides are going to talk about the action grant. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly because I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but I did include them because we always get these questions in our presentation. So I'm just putting them out there up front. Eligible project types, you can do planning, capacity building, regulatory updates. You can do design and permitting. So if you've got a project that's already been planned, you've done the feasibility assessment, you've decided that of however many options, this is really the right one to right route to take. So you could get funded to do the design and permitting over a 1 year or 2 year period. And if you've already done all of that, you can get funding to do actually shovel in the ground construction work. And so, any phase of your project can be funded under the MVP action grant. Things that aren't competitive, they're not going to fund diesel generators. They're not going to fund tree removal. Hazard mitigation plans, they don't need MVP funding to get done. There are plenty of other funding sources. And really everything on this list to the right here, the reason that MVP won't fund it is either that it doesn't have a direct link to improving resilience to climate change, or there are already other stable funding sources from state or federal funders to take care of it. So a couple of slides on completed action grants. Again, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I have a couple of example projects that have been funded under the action grant program in the past years. So I'll also give you all some information on where you can find resources about these projects and other previously completed projects, because there are so many, and it's at this point hard to pick which ones we want to showcase. But so this one, it's a watershed management and climate action plan in Lakeville. This is in Southeast Massachusetts. This was a regional action grant in that they're including multiple communities here. And they did planning assessments, capacity building, and regulatory updates for a watershed-based plan. And I think one of the impetuses for this project was to deal with flooding across the watershed. So, but they also addressed water supply and water quality, and also improving social resilience. In the Berkshires, the Climate Action, Resilience, and Equity in Great Barrington. This one was outreach and community engagement with underrepresented and marginalized groups to get them involved with climate adaptation planning. And that's a big focus of MVP, is making sure that you have a very diverse and representative group of participants, residents, who are sharing in the planning process and sharing in the implementation process. So you'll see that in all of the projects, that there's going to be some component of that. And the last one I'll show here is the Coonamessett River Restoration Project. This is also in Southeast Massachusetts on Cape Cod. It was $760,000 to do implementation of a river restoration and installation of a greenway heritage trail along that river. So just a snapshot of some of the things that can be funded. This image shows a almost brand new, sort of hot off the press tool that the state has put out. It allows you to dig around and look at all of the action grants that have been done. So you click on one of these dots and it'll bring up a little window, and it'll give you a paragraph about what project was done there. They're calling it their beta version of the Climate Grant Viewer. And Corinne, I think, is going to be able to put this link in the chat box as I'm talking here. So while I do hope that you stay tuned into the presentation over the next half an hour or so, maybe you can grab this link and check it out later on. There are also tabs in this viewer for other grant programs that are offered through the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, which is the Commonwealth Department that is running the MVP program. So that's just another resource, another way to find funding to do your projects, maybe if they're not MVP eligible. So going back to the planning grant, which is what we're working on today, this is our timeline. Your FY22 action grant RFR, as I said, was just released. The applications are due roughly 6 weeks after the release. The project starts for those action grants generally happen in August or September in 2021. The majority of those action grants are one-year grants, which means if you are starting in September, you have 9 months to complete. So that's something to keep in mind. Some of them can be 2 years. And all of these things are sort of questions to follow up with Carrie Ann on, but I wanted to put those out there. And our process is really more important. We are right in the middle to the right side of this, where we're doing our CRB workshops. The community engagement is ongoing. Once we get through these workshops, we will produce a report called our Summary of Findings report. That'll be a draft. It will go to the core team for review. And when we have a final public meeting, which will not be invite only as these workshops have been, but will be open to the public, we will get input on findings in that report. And with that public input, we will finalize it, and the town will have a final plan. So going back to the climate projections quickly, what I showed on the first screen were statewide projections. The Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center at UMass worked with the state in 2017 for the state climate adaptation and hazard mitigation plan to come up with these climate projections. And what was really cool is that for the first time ever, they downscaled those projections with a great degree of certainty to the local level, more or less. So what they were able to give us was either climate projections at the county scale or climate projections at the watershed scale, both of which are useful for different purposes. For our purposes in Chester, we're looking at the Westfield River Basin, so we're looking at the watershed scale. And that's what we're going to be focusing on for the next couple of slides here. So generally, again, increase in average temperatures and minimum and maximum temperatures, number of really hot days per year, increase in winter precipitation, increase in cooling degree days. Those are the days when you have to turn on your air conditioner. And the frequency of heavy precipitation is also increasing in our area, especially in the wintertime. We will have fewer very cold days, just as the statewide projection said, and fewer heating degree days where you need to turn your heater on. That makes sense, those two together. And potentially we will have less fall precipitation. And that's important for obviously reasons of agricultural and food security, and also for certain habitats and environmental health. So we're going to look into some of these more closely. I don't think anyone is going to be surprised that our average annual temperatures are going up, but I've certainly felt it. So we're gonna continue seeing that, and it's going to be true both for annual and seasonal projections. In our region, we're going to feel this the most, I'll say, in the summer and in the fall. The flip side of it, the fewer days below 32 is, and also fewer days below 0 degrees Fahrenheit is obviously going to be seen mostly in the winter, but also in the fall, with 10 to 16 days, 10 to 16 fewer days below 32 degrees by mid-century in the fall. And it's important because really even what seems like a very small rise or drop in average temperatures can cause major changes in other factors, like the proportion of our precipitation that's falling as rain versus snow. And then also impacts on species and ecosystem health. I mentioned agricultural already issues. So our agricultural operations, unusually warm winters are going to lead to early release from dormancy in perennial plants. And that often leads to damage from late winter or spring cold snaps. Like in 2016, we had a really bad year for peach crops in the northern half of the Northeast. And it was almost total losses from what I read. Further back, we've had years where grapes or apples or other crops in the region suffered losses following these sort of cold, wintry conditions after warm winters. The other way that this impacts us up in the Pioneer Valley and the Northeast in general is on our roads. So this trend indicates something that we're also seeing, which is an increase in the frequency of the freeze-thaw cycle, which is something that we have seen and I've heard about in recent years in my work in the Valley, really wreaking havoc on highway departments, because it's leading to all of these increased maintenance needs, increased costs of anti-icing measures in areas that previously didn't have a lot of midwinter thawing and freezing rain, but also increased costs of maybe regrading your dirt roads when you have these major thaw events that rut out the roads in a way that previously only happened in the spring. Other impacts, new species that might become invasive could be entering or have already entered the region due to these changes. So our sort of species hierarchies in our local ecosystems are changing. And at the same time, the stress that maybe shifts in the temperature have in these ecosystems are going to make it harder for those ecosystems to adapt. It's going to make it easier for new invasives to take advantage. And that's all part of sort of the expansion in the geographic range and the population size of tree pests like the hemlock woolly adelgid, the emerald ash borer, southern pine beetle. I'm sure these names are very familiar to you all at this point. Another thing that we hear a lot about is potential rise in vector-borne disease. So changes in temperatures and also precipitation can lead to increases in mosquito populations. And we're all hearing almost every year now, even out where we are, about outbreaks of diseases like Triple E. I don't think it made it to Chester yet, but it was on the eastern part of Hampden County last summer. And so these are things that are on our radar. Also, tick-borne diseases, Lyme disease, other tick-borne illnesses are continuing to increase and have in some cases changed their geographical distribution, finding their way into our region. A lot of that has to do with the fewer days of deep freeze in the summer. So all of this combined with increasing consecutive dry days, which I mentioned on that statewide slide, and the variable precipitation patterns, the temperature changes that we're showing can really have a negative impact on drought and also the increased risk of wildfires. So there are all these links that I'm going to keep sort of drawing between the various projections that the state data is giving us, because these are the types of things we want to be thinking about as we evaluate the features in Chester, you know, and how they are vulnerable. So let's look at those extreme temperatures. Beyond general warming, we are going to see more really, really hot days throughout the rest of this century is what this graph is showing us. The model used for these projections looked at daily maximum temperatures over 90 degrees, over 95 degrees, and over 100 degrees. And generally, as planners, we talk about extreme heat as anything over 90 degrees, because at temperatures above that threshold in our region, because it does matter what your standing temperatures are, but at temperatures above that 90-degree threshold, heat-related illness and mortality are showing just a marked increase. That's when people start to get sick. So right now in the Westfield River Basin, we see roughly 3 days per year over 90 degrees. And these are temperatures recorded at the Barnes Municipal Airport in Westfield, where they hit 90 degrees. I'm sorry, there's a better way for me to say this. So the baseline of this data set is 3 days per year over 90 degrees. And the baseline of this data set was taken around the 2000s. Temperatures recorded at the airport in Westfield in July 2019 hit 90 degrees 10 times in 1 month, 10 times in 1 month. So just going to show how much things are changing in real time, right? So from 3 days a year over 90 to 10 times in 1 month over 90 in Westfield. And this graph is just sort of showing us that it's going to continue to increase. We could have up to 24 more 90 degree day plus years by the middle of the century, and up to 60 more by the end of the century. So even though right now our summer daytime high temperatures, especially in our hill towns, are rarely going above 95 degrees, we might see more of that, and especially in the summer months. So we think about this, we want to look at this graph and know that the worst of these projections is linked to the worst emissions scenarios, meaning we need to rein in, you know, our contribution to climate change. And if we do, it won't get this bad. But it also means we really need to get serious about thinking about the consequences of extreme heat in our towns and in our regions, and in places where we have not, life as usual did not include 95-degree days, day after day after day. So that was temperature. I'm going to talk a little bit about precipitation again. Annually, we're expected to see up to another 7 inches of rain by the middle of the century, and up to as many as 9 more inches by the end of the century. We're going to see more of that in the spring and the winter. Understanding that both winter precipitation and winter temperatures are going to be increasing, we can then deduce that more of that precipitation is falling as rain instead of snow. And that it has all sorts of impacts, human and environmental impacts that could result from not having as much snow. So we've got reduced snow cover for winter recreation and tourism. That's a big deal for Chester. Maybe not the ski snowboard based tourism, but I know that there is a burgeoning tourism economy. Less spring snowmelt to replenish our aquifers. That's also extremely important, our aquifers and our cold water streams and fisheries. Higher levels of winter stormwater runoff, and lower spring river flows for aquatic ecosystems. And then that piece about higher intensity, shorter duration rainfalls. So the increased frequency of high intensity, or the more days with over 1 inch of rain is important to think about, because these are the types of storms that cause flooding, that cause erosion, and that can cause significant pollutant runoff from agricultural activities. And the flooding that comes from a single intense downpour of this magnitude can really cause a lot of damage to property, to critical infrastructure, you know, all of the town's really important assets. And I already said that it can mobilize pollutants. So, you know, adding nutrients, posing a threat to surface water quality. Lastly, the other effect I want to talk about of these sort of intense downpours, because of Chester's location nestled in these, you know, 2 mountains and the steep slopes all around you, your floodplains, as you all know, become very quickly inundated in heavy rains. So more flooding that happens as your soils are saturated from a massive amount of water that has come before means that those soils can't absorb any more water. That is just going to lead to a rise in your river flow, your creek levels, failure of your stormwater systems, and all of that as the capacity is exceeded. And you're not alone. This isn't Chester unique. This is happening elsewhere in the valley, but specifically your geological setting does increase that threat a little bit. And we do already know a little bit what this looks like, because again, this is the most pronounced change anywhere in the country in the Northeast. So more than any other region in the country, I should say, we are seeing this increase in high intensity rainfall in the Northeast. And it's been true over the past several decades. We've seen a 71% increase in the frequency of extreme precipitation events in the Northeast. So this is this graph here shows the maximum 24-hour precipitation, this one from the Amherst Weather Station. And just showing that major change in the trend line, which is the black line that goes through the blue and the red sort of squiggly lines. So the highest 24-hour rainfall event recorded in the last few years, it was nearly 7.5 inches. And I know that we've exceeded that since. In fact, the latest National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration precipitation frequency estimates already are showing that 24-hour 100-year storm rainfall event in Cummington, which is the closest station to Chester, is already at 7.62 inches. So while this graph is showing 7.5 inches being a real outlier, that's already the new normal. And this is just a snapshot to the left of a part of Chester's FEMA flood insurance study map. And I show this slide because to the right is an aerial photo of Route 4 in, I think it's Mendon, Vermont, after Hurricane Irene. And everything that I've been talking about so far with precipitation and climate change and what we can expect, this is really to illustrate that all of these areas that are either behind dams or levees or are near waterways or you know, that have experienced any flooding in the past, whether it's roadway flooding or shoulder washouts, anything that we already know is a bit of a risk, we can be positive, we can be sure that we're going to see more flooding there in the future. Roads that have only ever flooded maybe once during the heaviest of rains, we can be sure that they're going to be flooded in the future. this image shows an area of severe damage where you can't see any water in the picture, right? I mean, I don't see water here. But 48 hours beforehand, there was water rushing so fastly and swiftly that it took out half of the road. The idea being, you know, don't wait until it happens to think about how to mitigate the impacts. We really do need to sort of think out of the box and try to be, try to use our imaginations, if you will, to sort of connect what we're learning about the changes in climate, what we're learning about what we can expect, and fold that into how we can do what's right for our town. And lastly, you know, the review of all of these climate data and potential impacts, it really helps us recognize some of the challenges that we're already facing today. You know, these challenges, what this slide is really focusing on is that they're going to impact some individuals more than they will impact others. So a quick summary, we're going to see if I haven't already drilled this in. More extreme storm events, extreme precipitation, more extreme heat, warmer winters, and maybe more spring cold events, and then more summer drought. So we want to make sure as we go through today and in our next two workshops that we are including and thinking about our most vulnerable populations in our considerations and planning for reducing vulnerability in Chester. So, you know, social factors, we're talking about age, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, all of these increase a person's vulnerabilities to the impacts of climate change. Climate change is a threat multiplier. Any stressor that you already have in your life is going to be made that much more difficult with these climate impacts. And a lot of these factors also will increase exposure to the most dangerous environmental conditions, also making it more difficult for individuals to take precautions or access help before or after or even during extreme weather events that are to come. So, you know, this graphic is from the California Department of Public Health. It's just one that I thought is very thorough. So it does include some risks that we aren't concerned with here, but I think it's a very good, at least a good visual guide on the impact of climate change on human health and sort of considering existing inequities. You will hear more on this in the presentation in the third workshop, where we're going to be talking specifically about social and community resilience. But I think it's important that we are considering that throughout in all of the sectors that we talk about, including infrastructure tonight, including our environmental features and assets and vulnerabilities next week. So that concludes the presentation on the climate hazards. Do we have any questions before I move on into the next couple of slides here?
There is nothing in the chat, Emily.
Okay, great. So the next segment, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to hand it off to Meredith, and we're going to hear about some of the groundwork that she's been doing to spread awareness about this project and to really help us get a better sense of some of us being the project team, some of Chester's strengths and vulnerabilities related to climate change that we can use, that we have used to really be smarter about going into this workshop and talking with you all tonight and the next couple of workshops. So Meredith, I will drive. You can tell me to go, you know, next slide, but I'm going to give you the mic.
Wonderful. Well, first off, all of those things that are true coming down the pike, we also all know, because you live there, that Chester is really lucky in what it has to be able to grapple with these. And even though so many of these issues are going to be considered problems, you have so many amazing things to be able to combat it in terms of land, rich forest, amazing farmland, incredibly fresh and clean water. So know that you're in a really good position to grapple with these things. The other thing that really came out as I was talking to community members is that people think really creatively, and sometimes that's an unusual thing to have some far-reaching plans and some of the things that have already been done that will hopefully bring both rail back to Chester and connecting the river valley to the hill in some creative ways. Having the Westfield River, I'm particularly partial to water, as I'm sure many of you are, but I think that Chester is very fortunate in that way. But it also has some work to do in terms of where, when the water is abundant, where you want to have it go and be absorbed so that it can be there for you in the drought time. The other thing that's really exciting, you can move forward with the slide. Liz Mesa was kind enough to allow us to put this stunning slide in, and you have so many people in the community that are caretaking the history in Chester, and you're all aware of what a strength that is and how much power that gives you. I think it's an exciting time to ask the community to ruminate on when you're working on municipal vulnerability planning and when you start to go after an action grant, to really think about how you're going to include that public outreach that's such an important piece of this planning process and bringing everybody along. So I really encourage everyone to keep all of those creative ideas going and sharing them with other community members, because people will step forward and hopefully take on those pieces to not only have large impacts, but multiple small impacts in terms of how you use nature-based solutions in combating climate change. You can move forward. I think there's just one more. And I just was really thankful to have such a beautiful spot to welcome people and have people talking about their town with such pride. And I feel like you guys are really lucky to have as many people that really care about it. There are the issues that are coming down the river at you, and you've dealt with them before, but I'm really glad that you're starting to look ahead and identify which ones are make you the most vulnerable. You can see Carrie Banks here underneath the Main Street Bridge talking to a group that's gathered about the sediment that's building up, and that was in 2013. So these are things that have been ruminated on for a long time. And it's beautiful that the state has decided to put some funding forward to be able to start to grapple and hopefully take steps for some of those things. One of the things that comes up a great deal is the amount of forest and land that you have where people are going to come to enjoy themselves. And the recreation economy is certainly where people seem to be putting energy and excited about. That's another important element in taking care of those places. I think with the changing climate, Chester's in a unique position, but it also means that other towns that are not having the benefit may also seek out Chester in a way that the town is very wise to get ready for. But thanks for letting me join your town here and all aboard.
All right, thanks, Meredith. So we're just about ready to get started on the workshop portion. This slide here is showing you the risk matrix, which is one of the deliverables of this MVP planning process for a town. And it's what we're going to be working on in these workshops. We're going to be filling it out. So the matrix looks at the most pressing climate hazards in Chester. It looks at Chester's local features or assets that make it either vulnerable or resilient to those hazards or climate impacts. And then to the right, it looks at strategies to improve resilience and to reduce vulnerability to those features. So it's a stepwise process. And at the end, you've got well, when we were doing this in person, at the end, you had a multicolored, marked up, messy, but beautiful matrix with everyone's handwriting all over it. We are a little bit more organized because we have to do this digitally now. So we're going to be filling this in as we go tonight. That's what it's going to look like. But at the end of our 3 workshops, we are going to have this thing completed. And that's part of the draft plan that we'll put out for everyone to review and to get public feedback on. So the matrix itself, the hard copy version is split into 3 sectors or 3 categories that align with the 3 workshops that we are doing. I don't know that I mentioned before, but in the original design of this program in the last few years that we've been doing it before COVID, when we were in person, we're doing all of this in one day. So it's one 8-hour session where the morning is sort of our presentation and gathering input on features and assets and sort of the left side of the matrix. Then we have lunch and then we go and dive into the strategies. We're doing it a little bit differently now, but one of the things that the changes that we've made to facilitate the shorter version and the online version is that we've done some pre-populating of the matrix based on existing plans that the town has written, and also the work that Meredith has been doing in the meetings that she's been having with local stakeholders. So when we open up the live version of this that we're going to be typing in tonight, you'll notice that some of the cells are pre-populated. And the 2 main plans that are represented there are the hazard mitigation plan and the open space and recreation plan from town. And they are in there as suggestions. Anything that is in there that someone wants to say shouldn't be in there, we will take off. But that said, there's also an opportunity at the end of the night to weigh in on, whether you think something is more or less important or more or less has a higher or lower priority to tackle, or that may or may not be the most efficient or effective in dealing with our climate impacts. So the first thing that I want to just run by everyone is that those climate hazards that I mentioned on the top row of the matrix, we've pre-populated based on the local hazard mitigation plan, which is a very well-written plan. It's pretty recent. And so the information in there is really spot on for what we're doing here. The left side of this screen here shows the hazards, the natural hazards that are considered in Chester's hazard mitigation plan. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that plan, it's something that a town does every 5 years. They update it. And you do that so that you can remain eligible both for disaster mitigation grants, but also it impacts on your eligibility for certain flood insurance purposes as well. So Chester's got a great plan. I believe PVPC helped write it. And one of the outputs of that plan is sort of a ranking of the natural hazards that are most impactful or most, that bring the most risk for the town. Because we're only looking at 4 tonight, and our 4 have to be directly linked to climate change, I have sort of summarized everything from the hazard mitigation plan that was relevant and put it into these 4 categories. So tonight we're going to be thinking about intense rainfall and flooding as one category, wind, heavy winds, and the impacts of those types of events. Extreme cold and winter weather will be its own category, and then the last category is sort of a almost a catch-all, but related: extreme heat and also temperature fluctuation, as well as drought and wildfire, which, as I mentioned earlier, can be a result of the prolonged heat events. So Meredith mentioned something about nature-based solutions earlier, and I'm really glad she did, because I don't think I had used the term yet. This is a real cornerstone of the MVP project that is important to be thinking about as we go through tonight and the other 2 workshops coming up with actions. The idea of harnessing the capacity and the capability of natural systems to reduce risk to human health, reduce risk to infrastructure, all of these things, those are the sorts of projects that are really exciting for the MVP program that they really want to fund. So any opportunity we have to talk about them, we ought to be taking. So, you know, some examples here, we know that we've got, oh, did I just skip ahead? No, there we go. So for infrastructure strategies that might come out of it, we first consider our features in town, right? So infrastructure features in Chester, culverts are a big one. You know, they're often aging and undersized. Sometimes they're creating a barrier to flood and wildlife passage. I think one of these, no, I didn't put the Abbott Brook slide up there. But one location that was identified was along Abbott Brook, and that was from one of the stakeholder interviews. In 2016, PVPC, our transportation section, did a survey for Chester. You guys hired them to do a pavement management report. And so they surveyed 30 miles of your improved roadways and made recommendations for prioritized repair work, essentially. We know that you have both paved and gravel roads, and some are creating a barrier to flood passage. Some aren't operational year round. So, you know, in terms of getting creative, we might want to think about how those roads affect flood storage, the existence of those roads, or whether there are ways to rethink our transportation systems to give land back to, for instance, the floodplain or a wetland. As I mentioned earlier, gravel roads are facing all sorts of maintenance challenges with the freeze-thaw cycles and then heavier rainfall leading to gravel transport. So when we go into the slide where we're filling out the matrix, I want to put it out to all of you if there are any particular problem areas in Chester that we're seeing that in that we haven't captured yet. Bridges, there are a lot of bridges in town. So the photos here are showing Blandford Road and Stage Road, and also sediment buildup at Main Street Bridge. So that Main Street Bridge came up a few times in interviews. The debris from Hurricane Hugo, Tropical Storm Irene, and winter storms 2015 have sort of built up over the years in a really significant way, and it's limiting flow under one of the cells of that bridge. Dams need to be mentioned here. So in town, we've got the Chester Waterworks Dam, the Chester Blandford Dam, the Ideal Lodge Dam. All of these are non-hazard rated dams, meaning they're not on a routine inspection schedule, and they're not a high hazard rating because of it. Then there's the dam, or dams, I should say, upstream in Beckett, which have caused problems in the past. One of the actions from your hazard mitigation plan was to identify owners of dams of significant importance and contact them about dam inspection and maintenance requirements to have the discussion and make sure that the dam owners know what they're responsible for. And then to make a plan for a coordinated dam release during high rainfall events. And this sort of gets at, let's make sure what happened from the upstream dams in Beckett never happens again, and that we've got everyone talking to one another. So I think that's one of the actions that we dropped into the table, and you'll see it in there. It's a good idea, and it certainly meets an important need that will only be heightened with heavier rainfall events. Drinking water wells is another infrastructural feature. A major issue facing Chester might become, might arise as we experience more droughts. And if, if anything were to compromise your watershed land, so whether that's logging or whether that's invasive species or pests infestation that damage the trees, anything that could cause less filtration could impact your drinking water wells. There was an action from the hazard mitigation plan to prepare and implement a water conservation plan. So we'll see if that gets dropped into our table tonight. I also know that you have a municipal water system with a couple of reservoir storages. So I think the main source is Horn Pond and the backup is Austin Brook Reservoir. And that there has been some recent work around that. So you've got a strategic plan and assessment that was really, I think, recently done by a consultant. That assessment noted that you don't have any storage tanks. So maybe there's a concern for periods of drought, and maybe some storage tanks could mitigate that risk. That same report led to a strategic planning process, or was part of a strategic planning process, I should say. And now that once that's adopted and supported with budget and staffing, the local responsibility for water systems, and this may have already been accomplished, this is really all in real time, could shift to the highway department, and then the next step would be an asset management plan. So for folks on the call that are closely connected to this work, let's make sure this comes up in the discussion tonight where relevant, and if the next step is to do the asset management plan, and that's going to make us less vulnerable to impacts of future droughts, then let's talk about that. The electric grid and substations in town. So Chester's pretty unique in that it's got its own electric light utility. There's always a desire to move towards renewables. And in your hazard mitigation plan, you did mention working with Mass Wildlife and MassDOT to resume or continue tree trimming around Route 20 to prevent power outages. So power outages are a concern around the valley, and it's really about partnerships and coordination to try to mitigate those outages. Let's see, what else have I mentioned? The okay, transfer station on Town Road. This, I'm curious to hear from folks whether it's cut off in certain flood scenarios, and whether it would make sense to think about relocating it. But the other thing is, are large trucks able to pass under the underpass in a flooding situation? Is that ever a problem? That was something that came up in one of the meetings. And then lastly, your municipal buildings and emergency shelters. So this came out of your hazard mitigation plan, that the emergency housing agreement with Westfield State University is something that was in process a few years ago. Let's see where that went. Your backup shelter is Gateway Regional High School, and local emergency managers have inventoried all of your local temporary shelters, which is really great, especially with extreme heat or extreme cold or extreme weather events that cause power outages. A lot of people don't want to go to a shelter to sleep. They want to stay in their house, but they might go to a temporary warming space to charge up their cell phone, or a cooling center if your power is out and so your drinking water well pump doesn't work. You might want to go someplace to get drinking water, and these are really what we're talking about when we talk about temporary shelters. So we have a list of those. I think the next question is, how well do residents in town, not your emergency managers, but how well does everyone else know about them? Or do we need to maybe improve that piece of education? And then back to those nature-based solutions, which I mentioned at the beginning of the last slide. This is incentivized through the program. These are solutions that are going to enhance and work with the natural habitats and ecosystems and functions to help people adapt to climate impacts. And they also generally have great co-benefits of slowing global warming and protecting and preserving the very natural systems that are doing the service. So some examples for infrastructure solutions that harness nature-based solutions or rely on them: replacing a failing public road stream crossing, which is a fancy way to say replacing a culvert, to protect infrastructure and reconnect aquatic habitat. So co-benefits there. That was an MVP project that came out of Falmouth, but they also did a similar project in Belchertown under an MVP grant. Also, rain gardens that can reduce localized flooding and recharge aquifers. We have Patty Gambarini on with us tonight and throughout the project, and she's an expert in green infrastructure. Corinne Meismanns as well. So they're really good resources to have if you've got any ideas along those lines to bounce them off. Enhancing water supply reliability, resilient storage and water conservation planning. That is a title of a project that MVP funded in Belchertown. Another project funded was a feasibility study for dam removal, assessing the vulnerability of your wastewater treatment plant to various different probability flooding events. Those projects were funded in at least 2 communities under MVP grants. And then in Adams out west, there was a project that funded stormwater management planning and infrastructure mapping. And actually I say Adams because that's the example I pulled from for this slide, but there are a number of similar projects that are already happening even closer to home. So just a snapshot of some creative projects that are eligible under this program for funding and that are using nature-based solutions to achieve the climate resilience goals of the MVP program. So that is the presentation, and it is just almost 1/4 the hour. So we're going to dive into the good part here. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to give it to Corinne, who's going to pull up the matrix. So we're going to take about a half an hour, and we're going to go through these community actions. I'm going to start by sort of repeating some of what I presented on those slides earlier. Can everyone see this? All right. I am going to. All right, Corinne, I'm just trying to figure out how to make this bigger because on my screen it's pretty small.
Sorry, do you want me to make it bigger?
No, I think I'll just, okay, so what I just did there was I clicked on view for folks if anyone else is having the same problem. Clicked on view and I selected standard, and that took away everyone's faces and made the actual screen that Corinne is sharing bigger and easier for me to read. So I am going to maybe walk through the left-hand side of this, and these are all of the features that I just ran through on the slides, but I want to ask if anyone has thinks that we're missing anything here for infrastructure features that could be vulnerable to climate change, or that could help us be resilient to climate change, or both, right? So culverts, I think for the most part, the culverts we're thinking about are going to be vulnerabilities, and we'll ask you to identify any specific areas where we think that we need to look at maybe increasing size or capacity. Same with roadways, paved and gravel. So this is supposed to be at this point a discussion. So folks, this would be a good time to unmute and chime in to see if we're missing anything in this left-hand column. Corinne, if you can write on your spreadsheet to the very right side, sort of in the top corner where you see your little icon, there's an arrow beneath it. If you can click that arrow, I think it might give us more screen. There we go. Yeah, and maybe just scroll down so we can see the rest of the infrastructure features. We've got the municipal water system, we've got dams, the electric grid, and minor substations under that, the transfer station, we've got our bridges, and we can break that down into specific bridges and how they may be vulnerable and what needs to be done. The railroad, I didn't mention during the presentation, but that's obviously a really important infrastructure feature in town. Communication infrastructure, temporary emergency shelters, and all of our municipal buildings. So are we missing anything here, folks?
I see that Anne has her hand raised.
I do. Ann Daly again. I looked at item number 1, which is roads. And Meredith and I had a conversation about anyone who lives east of Route 20 across either of the bridges crossing the West Branch River. It has happened in the recent history that due to flooding situation and the potential for the Beckett Dam to break, all of downtown Chester was asked to evacuate. And I know our own personal situation and others who, when leaving town, had a great deal of difficulty, even though we left expeditiously out of town. And there, I don't know if it is part of the public safety / road component that it is looked at how to get people out of downtown through other means other than Route 20 that has had substantial flooding problems in the past, both west and east on Route 20 was impassable. It used to be that Prospect Street looped up through Cooper, which looped up to Abbott Hill and Sylvester Hamilton, and there was access past the transfer station down towards to Old State Road. It is something that has happened several times in the last 20 years. And if this pattern continues to increase, it is likely to happen again. And is this looked at? Is it on the list? And what's the discussion revolving that?
Yeah, I mean, you're bringing up a really important point, I think, about partially about evacuation routes and also the dam failure situation. I want to make sure I'm capturing this correctly. So is this sort of a multifaceted concern? Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, so in terms of the evacuation route problem, what is the biggest concern there? Is it that the bridges aren't high enough to, if there is this sort of flash flood event, or is it that parts of the neighborhood sort of outside of the riverine corridor are getting flooded so that you can't get out?
The most recent event was that both Route 20 east and west were impassable. So
Okay.
unless you could bypass those two areas, you could not follow the evacuation order. The Main Street and Maple Street bridges were passable, but the Maple Street Bridge very quickly on Route 20 side became flooded. So even if you went across, you couldn't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And there, I don't know off the top of my head how many homes are on the east side of the river. But what's the plan to get people out if you have to get them out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, and this is a question for your emergency manager, certainly. It's not one that I can answer off the top of my head. A hazard mitigation plan might address whether or not that sort of question is answered in your emergency response plan. But it is not, that's not a plan that we really spent a whole lot of time reviewing. But I think it's worth noting on here that there's the question, you know, and that you as a resident don't know the answer, whether or not the answer is in a plan somewhere. And I can't tell you that, but the important thing is that you don't know the answer, and it doesn't seem like anyone else in the group right now knows the answer. And that's a good enough reason to sort of, I think, dig a little bit deeper and add it to our inquiry list, if you will.
Thank you.
I've got a hand raised from Anne.
That was me. I thank you.
Oh, sorry.
I've got a comment from Laura Wade in the chat, who is saying Abbott Hill Road and Taft Hill Road, unknown if official town road. They do not have a different alternate route for emergency services if Abbott Brook gets flooded again.
Okay, so people are getting cut off rather.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Abbott with 1 T or 2 Ts?
I think it's 2.
And so are those cul-de-sacs, or are they like sort of one egress, one ingress roads, or are they through roads, but they get flooded in such a way that traps people on both ends?
Someone should correct me here if I'm wrong, but I think that the road, it on a map looks connected, but currently is not. Is that right?
Taft Hill is attached to Abbott Hill Road, but the mud from the water is absolutely horrible when it does get to that point. And from talking with other locals that were around on the hill, they didn't have any other way to get down off of the hill if it became flooded again. And that was a concern. And with the mud, because it is a rock road.
Yeah, and just so that we're clear about the nature of the situation there, they don't have any way to get down off of the hill to go directly to town, but they could go up the hill to Skyline and then sort of go around at a great time expense, and, you know, assuming that there are no other hazards up there. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
In part, there is part of Abbott that the brook is at the bottom of the hill, and there are residents, a number of residents, I would maybe 10, 12, Andy, you may know more accurately, that when the brook floods at the bottom, as it did recently with the heavy rain, those properties, the people in those properties have no egress at all. You can't get to them and they can't get out. It is also the road that goes technically on paper over the mountain, over the hill to Prospect Street via Cooper.
It does say no trespassing on that. And I live right at the bottom of Abbott Hill, right next to Abbott Brook. Abbott Brook is abutting my property. Yeah, I could see that, definitely.
Can I be heard? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
This is Richard. Taft Road is a private road, and there has been, it's kind of a rough road, and there's even a lumber trail in there that was recently done, and there is a section in there that's very difficult to pass through except for an ATV, which would bring you out to Johnson Hill Road. But that's one perilous way to get from that lower Abbott Hill area to Johnson Hill and then up to Skyline Trail if need be. I'm just, you know, in Upper Abbott Hill, we know, speaking of selectmen now, we're aware of the fact that we've got to figure out a permanent solution to Abbott Hill because We have just put a lot of money into that over good years when climate change was not a big threat compared to what it is now. And the road is very, very difficult. We've had some really rough times. So that kind of brings you up to date on what I know about Taft Road and Lower Abbott Hill. But Lori is correct. We've got to do something there, and we're going to do everything we can within reason to get it done within our limitations as well. So.
Okay, great. Thank you, Richard.
But that's a priority, I think.
You know, while we're talking about roads, do we want to put any others up here on the list as priorities or sort of problem areas with flooding?
Richard,
I think the issue.
What about Round Hill? Carl?
There's not enough people that live on Round Hill. Don't worry.
Yeah. I think the issue with getting people up from the Middlefield Road area, from the base of the hill there by Brookside and Chris Martinson's, from Middlefield Road in that area and getting up here to high ground is an issue, and we really got to focus on that. I think that's a priority, and we may have to look at some other ways short of having building. We're continuing to try to improve Johnson Hill, but we may have to look at trails, and Liz Mazza is very experienced at this. She's done so much with hiking trails, but some trails may have to be constructed that will allow some motorized vehicles, horses, wagons, and the like to get people up the hill in the event of climate complications. And down there in that lower area, that is in fact a low area, and you got a river going right through there. And I think the people on Middlefield Road are in some peril with climate change, some significant peril. And to get people from that side of, the west side of I guess it is the west side of Route 20 up the hill, as Ann mentioned, you can't, that iron bridge may not be passable, or if it is passable to Route 20 that's flooded. So we've got to get people out of the village from Maple Street and so on up to the hill in the most expeditious way possible in the event of emergencies, and get rescue vehicles of some sort down there to help them.
Okay, so I'm hearing, you know, there are a couple of specific roads and specific areas, but really you're speaking more generally, Richard, about the issue of folks down in the river valley, closer to the river on Middlefield Road and Route 20, and providing ways for them to get to higher ground for safety.
Exactly.
All right.
Emily?
Yes.
Bob Daly. I'm sorry, I don't have the ability to raise my hand. I don't know how to do that. So
no worries. We've got you. Go ahead.
Jumping in, but hearing Richard's voice reminds me that he has quite a thirst for water. And we've been talking particularly about flooding, but if I could just slightly move the conversation to the watershed, and specifically to Horn Pond, which you referenced earlier. I think everybody knows that is our primary drinking water source for the town. It is a surface water pond. And forgive me if this has already been addressed in other meetings. Is part of the focus for the grant, could it be land acquisition, specifically to acquire some of the, I believe it's about 17 properties that abut Horn Pond?
Yes, absolutely. That would be an eligible activity if you're doing it to protect the drinking water source that would be threatened because of increased temperatures or because of increased contamination threats from climate change.
I'm very happy to hear that response. So as we go forward, maybe you can outline the best way that we should prepare to move forward in terms of collecting additional documentation or whatever. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So, I think because we're sort of opening this discussion up, this would be a good time if you had any particular ideas or thoughts on the approach to that. So you mentioned acquiring these properties, and would this fall under the municipal water system category? If we're talking about an infrastructure feature, this is related to our municipal water system, correct?
It is, yes. That's our primary drinking water source. Austin Brook, that you also referenced, is currently our backup source.
Okay. And so the properties that you're talking about have, where are you in this process? Do landowners know that there's an interest?
I'm unaware of that. This is the first time it's been discussed, to my knowledge, at least publicly.
Okay.
I'm aware of. All I can tell you, Emily, is that there's approximately 17 privately held properties that actually abut the shoreline of Horn Pond. A few of them are off of Bancroft Road. The vast majority, I think 15 or so, are off Captain Whitney Road, for those of you plotting at home.
Okay.
So I'll wait for some direction from you or Meredith as to how you think best we should proceed with that, and most happy to help in any way. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, the action that we'd be identifying here would be to do an assessment of first of all, the impact of acquiring those properties, and also an outreach effort to bring those landowners into the discussion. If that sounds reasonable, we can put that on the list here as an action.
A great first step. I agree.
Okay, fantastic.
I just want to note that Eric and Chris both, or Erica maybe, and Chris both have their hands up. I don't have the participant list in front of me, sorry.
Great, can you, well, I guess, why don't we go ahead with Erica, and then we'll go for Chris.
Hi, it's Erin, actually.
Oh, Erin, sorry.
No worries. I guess I really was just sort of seconding the, I think there's an issue of access between the sort of lower village section of Chester and the hill. This is sort of what Richard was talking about, and the Abbott Hill issue. I know one of our employees lives on the infamous Taft Road, if you will, and had a situation where they had a chimney fire, and like the fire truck got stuck because it was during mud season, and they almost had a really bad situation because emergency facilities couldn't access their property. So there's been, I think, a lot of conversations about municipal maintenance of these roads and then alternate access points. But I live in Middlefield, and I come down Middlefield Road every day, and there's a huge elevation change, and there's several river crossings between different portions of Chester. So I just think that's a unique feature of the town that makes our solutions a little bit different than some, just the elevation change and the geographic features between us. But I think there's great conversation about this. I don't necessarily know what the solutions are, but I'm glad to hear that we're all talking about it.
Do you think, well, I mean, we started talking about Abbott Hill Road and Taft Hill Road, and then the conversation sort of migrated to Middlefield. So I'm wondering if the one of the strategies that was listed for Middlefield, which was like potentially increasing trail access for non-traditional, I'll say, non-traditional transportation for emergency services. Would that also be a potential strategy for Abbott Hill and Taft Hill, or are the conditions different?
I suspect that they would be the same, though I'm certainly not an expert in that. I think it's sort of twofold. There's not great roadway access, and then our emergency services don't necessarily have maybe non-traditional vehicles or different manners of accessing residents. So I don't really know what avenue would be the best way to pursue that, right? Do we need roads that are more resilient, or do our emergency services need better ways to get at people? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I would venture to guess that it's a mix of both, because while we can, there's a lot of really smart people out there doing a lot of good stuff with road work and infrastructure. There are some types of rainfall events that you're just not going to be able to handle, and so I think you can't always avoid having roads shut down for some period of time. So then the emergency response and finding alternative routes is another part of the process. And sorry, Corinne, you said there was one other hand up.
Yeah, but I just want to finish this. So we talked about looking at providing other trails, and then Aaron, what you were just saying is that another solution could be looking into acquiring different. Well, does emergency response currently have ATVs, or do they not have ATVs at all?
That's a wonderful question. I don't actually know the answer to that. I know Carl's on the call. He might know more about that because he's volunteer fire as well as our highway department. But I heard a horrible story about a fire truck getting stuck, and it made me sad and scared for everybody. So
me and my husband watched that for several hours. It was sad to see them all struggle. It was crappy, really cold weather outside. It was horrible.
Chris, can I call on you?
Yeah, this is a really very comprehensive list, and I'm wondering about, I think it was row 16 or so, but we were talking in here about shelters and places people go, and it's mentioned, oh, maybe it would be good to have generators. Actually, I think shelters are not helpful unless they are adequately stocked and provisioned and maintained. They're a little bit trickier to do. I mean, if you have a generator, that's great, but somebody needs to be testing it once a year, making sure it works. If there are other things like blankets or food, things that we would need to have in there in case, we got cut off or needed to be self-reliant as a community. So I'm just wondering where provisioning and maintenance fits into this. Is that a different discussion for a different day, or does it fall under infrastructure?
Shelters come up under infrastructure, and they also come up under the social community resilience sort of segment. So we don't need to be exclusionary. In terms of your question about provisioning, I think what I learned about Chester shelters and sort of the arrangement is that you've got the regional shelter, and this is true about a lot of our hill towns. You have the regional shelter that is going to be the Red Cross shelter. They meet certain standards. They have these cots, blankets. They've got a full kitchen. They've got full restrooms. They're ready to house people for certain periods of many days. In Chester, what we have is the temporary sort of warming, cooling stations that we're referring to as the temporary shelters. Now, your point is well taken that even if they have generators, does that mean that they can be effective as temporary shelters if they don't have, let's say, for one, if they're cut off and they can't be accessed? So that would be a big one in terms of the infrastructure conversation. Are the roads getting there passable? If you have backup power one way or the other, you should be able to have drinking water. You should be able to have heat or cooling if you are equipped with those features. So I think that the question would be, what are the shelters that are identified in Chester, and we would need the emergency manager to be helping us with that, but what are they capable of, and what do we want them to be capable of, right? Is that getting at your question?
Yes, it is, because it's as somebody who has a generator, I just know that they're quite useless if they're not well maintained and you don't have a fuel source for them. And very typically, when you have some sort of an event where the grid is down and people are coming to your shelter, that's often a time when getting fuel is difficult, if not impossible. So having a an adequate store. There's just quite a bit of thinking that goes into running a shelter. You know, how many people, how long, what sort of conditions, you know, what are you services are you trying to provide? So I'm just didn't know where that all fell.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we've noted here is that the temporary local shelters have generator hookups, which enable them to be operated off of one of the town's mobile generators. And so then it would be on the town to have that fuel source. And the plan that I mentioned during the presentation, that the emergency manager had done an inventory of their shelters and the generator capacity in town. That is not a plan that I was provided. So I can't say if we have those details. I think your question is sort of highlighting the need to learn more about what we know and what we don't know, and whether we really are equipped to make use of these resources the way that, you know, we're presenting them here as assets, right? Are they assets, or are they maybe potential vulnerabilities if we're telling people that they exist, but then we're not really ready to run them?
Yep, exactly. And this, if, you know, fuel became part of the conversation, we would definitely need to make sure Wheeler Oil is on these calls and involved.
Yeah, that's great. Where is Wheeler Oil?
Right on Route 20, just slightly east of town.
Okay, fantastic. Got a couple of minutes more here, and I don't want to, I want to say that if there's something we don't get to tonight on this list, because I talked a lot tonight, that the next two workshops are not going to have as much presentation. So there will be more of the discussion. So if we don't get to something on this infrastructure list, there are two ways we can revisit it. The first is for all of you as stakeholders to go and take a look at this list on your own between now and next Tuesday. You all have the link, you all have access to this this worksheet, and you can share your thoughts in the worksheet or through emails, and we can add them in that way. And the other opportunity is just when we pick back up next week, we can, you know, we'll ask everyone, is there anything you wanted to add to the list that we worked on last week? If so, we'll start there and spend, you know, 10-15 minutes on that, and then move on to the environmental discussion. But aside from that, does anyone have anything else that they want to add? Some of the features that we didn't really get to are the electric grid, the transfer station. We did talk a little bit about bridges, but none sort of specifically, more just in terms of access and evacuation routes. Any other input on those features?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I got cut off for a little bit there, and I know that Aaron was speaking about the need for evacuation routes, and we've all been talking about that. And as I understand it, Liz has developed, we now have an interlocking trail system that goes within the town limits. And I'm sure that some of those trails may be rough, but I think to the extent that we can, we ought to look at those trails as emergency evacuation routes, as far as they can fit with whatever needs we have, as we talked about Taft and I have no idea how those routes work around town, but we ought to look at those existing trails, not to expand them necessarily, but look at them as possible ways to help people evacuate in the case of emergencies.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And in my mind, there would be an assessment of what's out there, and maybe Liz has already done that, but then also a real deliberate education piece. So making sure that the people who we're saying would be relying on these trails not only know that they're there, but are capable of using them in this way. You know, what if someone has a physical disability or some other functional need that prohibits them, or what if someone doesn't have an ATV or a horse or some other way to get them up the hill. You know, not everyone is able-bodied in the same way. So I think there are a couple different aspects to that thought process and sort of that planning, but it's a great start and could be a really interesting project to pursue.
Okay.
Erin?
I just want to say quickly, in the chat, Meredith had, I think, accidentally just sent to me, so Patty wasn't able to see it, an idea for the Horn Pond Reservoir. So I'm just filling that out here, include assessment to show what activities on the pond impact water quality. So that I'm including that in the feasibility assessment that we spoke about before.
Okay, great, thanks.
And I have a question out of curiosity to sort of reframe some of the thinking about this emergency evacuation need. Are there, like, what are the root causes of, you know, is it because of Chester's geology that it's inevitable that there will be flooding? Or are there things, those sort of nature-based solutions that we could look to help maybe not avoid those impacts, but even maybe reduce those impacts when they do come? Is there anything along those lines that we could be thinking about related to infrastructure?
Yeah, as in, for instance, Patty, looking at a bridge that is getting flooded because it's not giving enough space for the floodwaters to go, or a culvert for the same instance, right?
Yeah.
That's a
Can I
great
jump in, Emily?
Yes, please.
All the people that spoke about the evacuation due to flooding concern all make valid points. I agree with all of them. I think the heart of what they're getting at is if the three bridges that access the northern part of downtown, if you will, if those three bridges are incapacitated due to flooding or some other event, we need to have access to get up to Rich Holzman's so he can transport us by tractor somewhere. He has a search and rescue service. I don't know if you knew that. But seriously, if you look on your map and you see Cooper Street, that at one time connected all the way up to Abbott or perhaps Sylvester Hamilton. Today, and for the past 30 years or so, it's been nothing more than a ATV dirt bike track. But it's fair to say, I think it is fair to say that it could easily be, shall I say, improved enough to allow for emergency access of four-wheel drive type vehicles in the event they were needed. Thank you.
Sorry.
What was the name of that street?
Cooper.
Cooper.
It's off a Prospect.
Also for Abbott Hill, the Abbott Brook, me and my husband walk our property a lot. So we make sure, like, we just had a really bad windstorm. So we just walked a little bit up along the brook just to make sure there were no fallen trees that were going to build up in the brook area. So that way they weren't going to come down and block off the access for that road. So we do, you know, we walk around, we make sure that it's not, so I guess that's nature based.
Yeah, Laura, I think that's a great example. And it sounds like what you're saying is that you sort of do it just volunteering with your husband on your own time, but maybe there's a way to turn that into a strategy where it becomes a more formalized approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Me and my husband would, yes. And we would like that. And we also have, there's a piece of property also right next to the other side of Abbott Brook. I'm not sure what they're doing with that property, but because it's abutting and it's a conservation type of area, that would be nice since we live here. You know, I have no problem. Me and my husband like to go out there and take a look at it.
Great. I want to get to these two other hands raised, and then we're going to jump into some prioritization. Erin?
Yeah, I sort of wanted to jump. We'd mentioned the municipal electric and some of the other areas that we haven't touched on yet. I think our sort of, I believe it's town-owned municipal electric system, I think is both a strength and a vulnerability sometimes. It's a strength in that I think our system has a very fast response time to outages. There's a facility that happens because there's not as much bureaucracy. They get power back online very quickly. They're wonderful. there's also been challenges where I don't think we can access state programs as easily. I'm thinking of like mass saves and some of the incentives for energy efficiency. I know when we were upgrading our building for the business, we were just told, well, Chester doesn't participate in mass saves, so you can't get, the rebates or whatnot. So I just wonder if there's a strategy in here somewhere to get access to those programs that already exist. Like there's infrastructure there that I think maybe Chester isn't tapping into because of something that's also a strength for us as far as renewables, as far as, the sort of solar buybacks and all of that. I'm not an expert in this at all, but it's a question I have.
Yeah, that's a really great, I'm glad you brought it up. And I just typed in, let's find out how we can get access to these types of state renewables grants. And we can refine all of these, we just want to get them on the list right now. Thumbs up from Laura. And Liz, I want to give you a chance to speak, and you'll be our last sort of piece of input here before we dive into some prioritization.
Okay, thanks, Emily. On Rich's comment with Cooper and using trails for emergency evacuation, I mean, that's a great idea. The problem is obviously it has to be good for everybody. So people that have any kind of disability at all will not be able to do that. And Cooper Road, I was up there not too long ago. It does connect, but it is a complete ravine. It would take more Chapter 90 money than God to get that thing going, even for an ATV. So, I mean, it's not in good shape. So I think other options should be looked at. I don't think that Cooper's even, I couldn't even walk through it. So yeah. It's not good. And then my only other thing is what you have transfer station on there?
Yeah.
As an item.
Yeah, and that was on there, came out of some conversation. It was in one of our notes that it may be in, based on its location and its access road, that there may be issues getting to it if there was a flood, and maybe it itself could be flooded, which could have environmental consequences. And so, is there actually concern about that broadly? And if so, do we want to think about moving it?
As far as that goes, it is located very close to the river, but it has a few issues. The old landfill sits below it. So if you're talking any kind of flooding at all there, it would be an extremely large problem.
Okay. All right, so again, this does not have to be a final list, but I'm going to run through. Corinne's going to pull up a poll. What I'm going to do is for each line here where we've got a feature and something, some sort of an action, whether it's an action that I pulled in from the hazard mitigation plan or open space and recreation plan, or something that we just came up with during our discussion. I'm going to read that, and we're just going to do sort of a rapid fire. We're going to ask, if this were to be implemented, are we talking about a short term, a long term, or an ongoing action? Short term, think 5 years or less. Long term, more than 5 years, and obviously ongoing is ongoing. And you can have, will allow you to select more than one. So it can be short term and ongoing, meaning, if it's like a community outreach thing or engagement thing, you want to do it this year. You really want to get started, but it also has to be something that you're doing routinely here on out, or as Chris was mentioning with the maintenance of generators. And then priority, relative to nothing else, this is just your opinion for reducing the town's vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. Should this be a high priority, a medium priority, or a low priority? So Corinne, will you pull up the polls and we'll start from the top?
All right, so see that?
Yes, I can see it. So we have, again, we've got how many people on right now? I think we still have 13. So,
oh yeah, so not including us, yeah, 13.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get around 13 for each of these. So the first one we'll ask about is under culverts, and this was one I pulled in from the hazard mitigation plan, which is implementing strategies in the Chester open space and recreation plan regarding the protection of forests and floodplains, and I think specifically around Abbott Brook. Bryn, let me know when you've got, 10.
Yeah, right now we're at 6.
Okay.
Is everybody figuring out how to vote? Okay.
Yeah, if anyone's having trouble with the voting, just speak up, please, and we'll walk you through it.
Okay, now we're at half, so 8 have voted.
Okay, we don't have time to spend too much time on each of these, so another 10 seconds. And if folks aren't voting because they're having trouble, please let us know.
We're at 10 now, so 10 out of 16.
Okay, and
oh, go ahead.
I don't know if I'm I don't know if I'm having problems. How many questions were there?
Just 2.
I answered those. Okay, got it.
Okay, great.
All right, so how for a timeline, Corinne?
So short is the winner with 60%, but ongoing is about 40%. So it's almost evenly split. I would do S/O personally.
Okay.
With my side.
And priority?
Again, split 60-40, high medium.
Okay, we'll just do high medium then. Thank you. Next up, we're gonna rerun the poll. This is for the drinking water. And so there's prepare and implement a water conservation plan, develop water conservation plan, including a plan for targeted public outreach. This came from I want to say from the open space and recreation plan, but it might have been a hazard mitigation plan. So water conservation plan.
I don't have it on my screen for some reason.
Yes, I haven't run the poll yet.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Emily, do you want to do the 2 strategies together? Just run it as a feature for high, medium, low, short-term, long-term, ongoing?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So there's the water conservation plan under that feature, and then there's going to be working with the Chester Highway Department to identify potential areas for reduced or substitute road salt use.
Okay, so now I'll relaunch the poll. Okay, and we'll give 20 seconds for this one.
Yeah, thanks.
Just speed along here. I'm going much faster this time. Great. Great, so we're at 11 out of 16, and I'm going to end the poll.
Great.
So this one's split for time frame. The most votes was ongoing at 55%, but short got 36% and long got 18%. So ongoing is the winner there.
Okay.
And then for priority, 55% said high, so that's the winner. Medium was 36% and low was 9%. So I think we should just.
I think it's high.
Yeah, I've always defaulted to the highest priority that somebody has thought previously.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So I think going with high sounds good.
All right, sticking with municipal water here, we've got the 2 actions that were from other plans. First is implementing the proposed water supply protection district to regulate land use activities and set performance standards for activities on privately owned land within the watersheds. And then the other actions from the Chester Water Source Water Protection Plan, and also investigating water system for leaks. So basically implementing these recommendations from previous plans to improve the resilience of the Chester water system.
And it looks like there might be some overlap between that first one, the Water Supply Protection District, and regulate land use activities with the Horn Pond strategy as well. So I don't know I guess we can do them separately just because they look separate. But here we go, launching the poll. So we'll do another 20 seconds, but if people are able to get in their votes sooner, that's great. All right, ending in just 2 seconds. All right, gonna end now. So in this case, the time frame 55% said ongoing, and then the rest was mixed, but that's the clear winner. So I'll just say that, and that's how I'll do that from now on. And then for priority, high priority got 55% of the vote. There were votes for the others, but that's the highest by far.
Okay, great. The next one is one that came out of this discussion. It's about the 17 private properties are abutting the shoreline of the source drinking water pond. So what we came up with is do an assessment of the impact of acquiring these parcels to preserving the natural resource of the drinking water, and engage with property owners about the possibility of the town taking ownership.
Okay. Sorry, I lost my. All right, relaunching the polling.
And I've realized that we are past 8 o'clock now. For those of you that are able and willing to stay on for a couple minutes as we do this exercise, we really appreciate it. If you can't, feel free to shoot us an email with your input or access the spreadsheet online. And
okay.
If you do have to leave, we thank you for your participation.
Great.
All right, we good with that one, Corinne?
Yep. So time frame 45% said ongoing, which is the largest group. And then for prioritization, 64% said low, with 36% saying high and no one saying medium. So low is definitely the biggest group, but there was a contingency of high. So.
Okay. All right. Dams, this came out of the hazard mitigation plan. Identify owners of dams of significant importance and contact them regarding dam inspection and maintenance requirements, and then work to develop a plan for the coordinated dam release during high rainfall events.
Okay. Sorry. Launching the polling. Okay, closing it in a second. All right, ending the poll. Short-term wins at 55%. Ongoing got 45%, so maybe it should be short, SO.
Okay.
And then high is the clear winner for prioritization at 64%.
Great. Moving on to the electric grid and substations feature. The idea here is to find out how we can get access or create access to state grants that seemingly are not accessible right now because of the organization of the local light department.
Okay, just a couple more seconds. Great. Short term at 73% and high at 73%.
Great. All right, next up, we've got, let's see, is this an action? I'm going to skip this one because it's about getting people to the top of the hill, and I think we have something at the bottom with that. the railroad action that came in from the hazard mitigation plan is to set up a partnership with CSX and other towns to prevent brush fires along the tracks, looking at strategies such as placing rocks or removing leaves and brush along the tracks.
Okay, I have relaunched the poll. All right, that one was fast, everybody. Great job.
Awesome.
So the time frame is ongoing at 73%. And it's a clear medium priority at 55%.
Okay, thank you. Next up is the communication infrastructure. We didn't talk about this at all, but from the hazard mitigation plan in the zoning regulations for telecom facilities, the recommendation is to add safety and prevention of wind-related damage as a stated purpose in that regulation.
Okay, poll has been relaunched. All right, ending in 3. Okay. Ongoing at 80% and medium at 70%.
Great. Next up is our shelter action. So this is a sort of multi-part, but ensuring shelters are well provisioned. Chargers for cell phones, food and water, blankets, fuel if needed for backup power, etc. And if they do have their own generators, that they're well maintained, that they're tested on the appropriate routine maintenance schedule, and that they have adequate fuel on site.
Okay, ending in 2. All right, ongoing at 60% and high at 70%.
Excellent. All right, next up is our evacuation routes, specifically Route 20 and other evacuation routes, but Route 20 came up a lot. So the action is to look into whether we have plans for evacuating when both bridges are impassable. Also to look into improving Cooper Road enough that it can be used by ATVs and emergency rescue vehicles for transportation during emergencies. And I think that our next action is going to build on this, but for now we'll look at this one.
All right, so short at 73% and high at 55%.
So short at 33, you said?
73.
Oh, 73, okay. And high. All right, so the next one, this is more specific to the Abbott Brook and Abbott Hill Road area, and then the Taft Hill Road. So all related to the challenges with emergency services in that area during mud season. So the action is to assess existing trails and determine the feasibility of using or creating new trails for evacuation. Also looking into emergency response capacity with ATVs, do we have them? And is that a reasonable expectation that they could be used? And lastly, institutionalizing surveillance of waterways to locate and remove debris and downed trees to allow water to move freely through the system.
I have a question.
Sure.
Could we also include for the ice in the winter for Abbott Hill Road? Because sometimes that I've seen trucks like slide off the road on that. It's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, sure. I'll put that in the description of the feature itself.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, I've relaunched the poll.
So this is sort of the same as the one above, except with the addition of the sort of institutionalizing surveillance, and that it's specific to the Abbott Brook and Taft Hill roads. Is that correct, Corinne?
Yes, well, I think the one below it, Middlefield Road and the Abbott Brook, so 20 and 21 are the same. And then the way that those two differ from the Route 20 evacuation routes is that there's the bridge scenario and like the official evacuation routes. So there's similar strategies, but they're just kind of different features, if you know what I mean.
Okay, so, all right.
I think that we can, for the prioritization and timeline, we can combine 20 and 21.
Okay, and then I'm just wondering if we need a separate action to do sort of a more of a comprehensive assessment of evacuation capabilities, because both of these talk about the trail option, but don't really consider, you know, what happens to folks that can't use the trails.
And we need access for larger equipment, big trucks.
Good point.
Okay.
We were addressing the folks living north of the West Branch. You point out it didn't address those living south.
All right, so where do we want to, well, I can add in the emergency response capacity with ATVs as well as larger equipment.
Yeah, and then maybe to your point before, Emily, the like just comprehensive evacuation route, like updating the plan for that, or like doing some scenarios around that, I would put that with 19, row 19.
Okay.
I think that's the point you were making.
Yeah, and then the gentleman who just spoke up about looking at properties to the south, where does that fit in? I've sort of lost as to which one of these we're talking about there.
I was just referencing, we've been talking about an evacuation plan up possibly via Cooper by trails up to Abbott Brook. That would address the people with concerns to the north of the West Branch, but not the South Branch. They would have different evacuation concerns. And I thought that's what you were getting at, would be to address that.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Oh.
Okay. Corinne, where did I leave you?
So this is prioritization and timeline for actions 20 and 21.
Okay, great. What do we have?
Short term and ongoing, they're tied at 56.
Okay, short, ongoing.
How can they each be 56%?
Because you can choose more than one.
Oh, okay. And then they are at high at 67%.
Okay, so we already did the Horn Pond Reservoir one.
Yes.
So I'm just going to jump back up to the thing that I just put down, which is to review and assess evacuation plan if one exists, and if one doesn't exist, to create one for all residents, both to the north or the that would be impacted by flooding or being cut off from the North Branch or the West Branch or the Westfield, and specifically including the public engagement component. So making sure that all residents, regardless of where they live and their physical capabilities, could be accommodated.
Well done. That's the whole of it.
All right, great. So I'm going to put that out there. That'll be our last action to vote on, and I'm going to give that its own time frame and priority.
Okay, last voting is up. Okay, give it 3 more seconds. All right. So we've got another tie at short and ongoing, and high priority at 63%.
All right, fantastic. So this went very well. I'm sorry we went a little bit over. This is not my style, and I'm confident that the next two will stay within the 2 hours. But I wanted to thank you all so much again for being here. First and foremost, you know, the town can't do this without your voices. It's not only an integral part of the design of the workshop process, but you know, if you need another reason, it's also helping the town to meet their match requirement for this grant. Your hours are being recorded here, and so we thank you for that reason. You all have all the information for the next two meetings, same place, same time for next Tuesday. And then the following week, it's a little bit longer of a break, but sorry, it's not a longer break, but we're going, rather than another Tuesday, we're doing the Saturday, April 10th, and that is a longer session so that we have more time to double back and touch on anything that we missed, and also just hear some thoughts and input about the process as a whole. And then after that, we'll let you all know when we have a public listening session planned, and we'll ask for your input on that as well. So again, thank you all for your time tonight. We really, really appreciate it. You have my email address and Corinne's email address and Meredith's email address. If you have questions in the interim, please reach out. There's also the MVP at townofchester.com. Take a look at the materials on the shared drive. They're there for you. And if you want to contribute more to the matrix, you can also see what's coming up for next week. So you could let us know whether you want to add something to discuss on that, on the environmental risk matrix as well. So that's all for me. Have a great night, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Great job, MVP team. Thank you.